Marcus Thompson had been homeless for 3 months when he found himself rummaging through the trash can behind the old grocery store on 5th Street, his dignity buried somewhere beneath the layers of hunger and desperation that had become his daily reality. The autumn rain had soaked through his worn jacket, and his empty stomach cramped with the familiar pain of another day without a proper meal, forcing him to search for anything edible that might have been discarded by those fortunate enough to waste food. As he lifted the heavy lid of the dumpster, his weathered hands trembling from both cold and malnutrition, he heard a sound that made his heart stop, a low whimpering that spoke of suffering beyond anything he had experienced even in his darkest moments on the streets. There, collapsed against the base of the trash can, was a medium-sized mixed-breed dog whose brown and white fur was matted with dirt and dried blood, his hind legs clearly broken and useless, yet somehow he had dragged himself to this exact spot with a determination that defied his obvious agony. The dog's eyes, clouded with pain but still holding a spark of desperate hope, locked onto Marcus's face as if he had been waiting specifically for this moment, for this man, for this encounter that would change both their lives forever. What struck Marcus most profoundly was not just the animal's obvious suffering, but the fact that clenched carefully in his mouth was a sealed envelope, pristine white against the grime of the alley, as if the dog had protected this precious cargo through whatever terrible ordeal had brought him to this place of desperation. The letter bore no address, no name, just a simple message written in shaky handwriting that read, "Please help him," across the front, words that seemed to echo the silent plea in the animal's exhausted eyes as he struggled to maintain his grip on what was clearly his most important possession. Marcus forgot his own hunger as he knelt beside the injured animal, his own problems suddenly seeming insignificant compared to the suffering before him, recognizing in the dog's condition a desperation that mirrored his own but magnified by the animal's complete inability to help himself. The dog's tail gave the faintest wag when Marcus reached out with gentle hands, as if he understood that his long journey had finally brought him to the right person, someone who would understand what it meant to be abandoned and forgotten by a world that seemed to have no place for the broken and the lost. Despite having nothing to offer, no money for veterinary care, and barely enough resources to keep himself alive, Marcus felt an overwhelming compulsion to help this creature, who had somehow found the strength to drag himself to this exact location with nothing but faith that someone would care enough to respond to his silent cry for help. The weight of the moment settled over Marcus as he realized that this broken animal had traveled an unknown distance, endured unimaginable pain, and preserved a message that someone had entrusted to him, displaying a loyalty and determination that put human behavior to shame and reminded Marcus of values he had almost forgotten during his time on the streets. As he carefully took the letter from the dog's mouth, noting how reluctantly the animal released it and how his eyes followed every movement, Marcus understood that he was being offered not just the chance to help another living being, but the opportunity to rediscover his own humanity in a world that had stripped away everything else he once thought defined his worth and identity. With shaking hands that had nothing to do with the cold rain still falling around them, Marcus carefully opened the envelope while the injured dog watched his every movement with eyes that seemed to hold both hope and resignation, as if he had fulfilled his purpose in delivering this message but feared what might happen next. The paper inside was expensive stationery, the kind Marcus remembered from his previous life when he had worked in an office and such things mattered, before the factory closure and the series of unfortunate events that had led him to this alley where he now knelt beside another soul who had fallen from grace. The handwriting was shaky, clearly written by someone elderly or ill, and as Marcus read the words, tears began to stream down his weathered face, mixing with the rain as he absorbed the full impact of what had been entrusted to this faithful animal who had dragged himself through who knows what dangers to deliver this final message. The letter was from Eleanor Whitman, an 87-year-old woman who explained that the dog's name was Charlie, and that he had been her constant companion for the past 6 years since her husband's death, providing comfort and purpose during the loneliest chapter of her life when everyone she had ever loved had passed away. Eleanor wrote that she was dying, that the cancer had spread too far for treatment, and that her greatest fear was not death itself but what would happen to Charlie when she was gone, knowing that her advanced age and lack of family meant no one would care for him with the love and devotion he deserved. She explained that Charlie had watched her grow weaker each day, sensing her approaching death with the intuition that only animals possess, and that she had trained him to carry this letter because she knew he would find someone with a kind heart, someone who would understand that love was not measured by wealth but by the willingness to care for another living being even when you had nothing left to give. The letter revealed that Eleanor had been evicted from her apartment the previous week when she could no longer afford the rent, and that she and Charlie had been living in her old car until she became too weak to continue, at which point she had written this letter as her final act of love for the dog who had given her so much joy in her final years. She wrote that Charlie was trained, gentle, and incredibly loyal, that he had never bitten anyone or caused trouble, and that whoever found him would discover a friend more faithful than any human they had ever known, if only they would give him the chance to prove his worth. The most heartbreaking part of the letter was Eleanor's promise that she had spent her last $20 on dog food that she had hidden in various locations around the neighborhood, creating a treasure map on the back of the letter so that Charlie would not starve while searching for someone to care for him, her final act of maternal protection for the creature who had loved her unconditionally. As Marcus finished reading, he looked down at Charlie, who had somehow managed to drag himself closer, and was now resting his head against Marcus's leg, as if he understood that the message had been delivered and accepted, that his journey through pain and desperation had not been in vain. The dog's breathing was labored, and Marcus could see that his injuries were severe, probably the result of being hit by a car during his desperate search for help. Yet he had continued on his mission with a determination that spoke to the depth of his love for the woman who had entrusted him with this final task. Marcus realized that Eleanor had chosen well, that somehow this brave animal had found his way to someone who understood what it meant to be alone and forgotten, someone who still had enough humanity left to recognize courage and loyalty when he saw it, even in his own desperate circumstances. The weight of responsibility settled over Marcus as he understood that this was more than just finding help for an injured animal, but honoring the dying wish of a woman who had loved Charlie enough to spend her final resources ensuring his survival, trusting that somewhere in a world that had abandoned them both, there existed someone who would recognize the value of a love that asked for nothing in return except the chance to continue giving. Eleanor's letter had transformed this encounter from a random meeting in an alley to a sacred trust, and Marcus knew that regardless of his own circumstances, he could not fail either the woman who had written these words or the dog who had risked everything to deliver them to the right person at exactly the right moment. Marcus sat in the rain beside Charlie, the letter clutched in his hands as he grappled with the impossibility of his situation, knowing that the dog needed immediate medical attention that would cost hundreds of dollars he didn't have, while his own survival depended on the few coins he managed to collect each day from the kindness of strangers who were becoming increasingly rare in a world where everyone seemed to have their own struggles. The nearest veterinary clinic was 6 blocks away, and Charlie's condition made it clear that time was running out, his breathing becoming more shallow with each passing minute as his body fought against injuries that were beyond Marcus's ability to treat with the crude first aid knowledge he had acquired during his time on the streets. Yet as he looked into the dog's trusting eyes, Marcus saw something that transcended his practical concerns, a faith and loyalty that deserved better than being abandoned to die in an alley simply because the person who found him lacked the financial resources to provide proper care. The irony of the situation was not lost on Marcus as he considered how society would view this moment, a homeless man with no money trying to save a dog that most people would assume he couldn't properly care for even if the animal recovered, the kind of judgment that had followed him since he lost his job and subsequently his apartment, his savings, and finally his belief that hard work and good intentions were enough to guarantee survival in a world that seemed designed to crush those who stumbled even once. He thought about Eleanor, dying alone somewhere with her final act being this desperate attempt to ensure Charlie's survival, and realized that they were all casualties of a system that measured worth by financial status rather than the content of character. 3 beings who had loved and been loyal but found themselves discarded when circumstances beyond their control changed their situations. Marcus made a decision that defied logic but honored something deeper than practical concerns, lifting Charlie as gently as possible despite the dog's obvious pain and his own physical weakness from months of inadequate nutrition and exposure to the elements. Each step toward the veterinary clinic was agony for both of them, Charlie whimpering softly with each movement while Marcus struggled against his own limitations, his body protesting the additional weight and exertion even as his spirit felt stronger than it had in months because he was finally doing something that mattered, something that connected him to his former self who had once believed in helping others regardless of personal cost. Other people on the street avoided them, crossing to the other side or averting their eyes from the sight of a homeless man carrying a clearly injured animal, their discomfort obvious as they encountered a situation that challenged their assumptions about who deserved help and who was capable of providing it. The veterinary clinic's waiting room fell silent when Marcus entered with Charlie in his arms, his appearance immediately marking him as someone who didn't belong in this clean, middle-class environment where pet owners discussed premium food brands and expensive procedures without considering the cost. The receptionist's expression shifted from professional courtesy to poorly concealed skepticism as she took in Marcus's worn clothes and obvious lack of resources, her questions about payment plans and deposit requirements making it clear that his presence was viewed as problematic rather than compassionate. Marcus explained Charlie's situation and showed Eleanor's letter, watching as the staff read the heartbreaking words while still maintaining their professional distance, their sympathy for the story not extending to confidence in his ability to follow through with treatment and payment obligations. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the veterinarian on duty, examined Charlie with the thoroughness that Marcus had hoped for but couldn't afford, her diagnosis confirming his worst fears while also revealing the full extent of the dog's injuries and the miracle that he had survived long enough to complete his mission. She explained that Charlie had multiple fractures, internal injuries, and signs of prolonged malnutrition, requiring surgery, extended hospitalization, and ongoing care that would cost more than Marcus had seen in his entire time on the streets, yet she also noted the dog's remarkable spirit and will to live, qualities that made her reluctant to recommend euthanasia despite the practical impossibility of the situation. The conversation that followed forced Marcus to confront the harsh reality that good intentions and pure motives were insufficient when faced with the economic requirements of modern veterinary medicine, even when the patient was a hero who had risked everything to honor a dying woman's final wish. Dr. Mitchell's initial skepticism began to transform as she listened to Marcus read Eleanor's letter aloud, her professional demeanor softening as she recognized the genuine love and dedication that had brought Charlie to this moment, the remarkable journey of an animal who had endured unimaginable suffering to fulfill a promise to someone who had loved him unconditionally. The veterinary staff gathered around as Marcus shared the story, their eyes filling with tears as they absorbed the full impact of Eleanor's final act of love and Charlie's heroic determination to find help, his loyalty transcending species barriers and touching something fundamental in everyone who heard about his desperate mission through the streets. Dr. Mitchell made a decision that went against standard clinic policy, agreeing to begin emergency treatment for Charlie while working with Marcus to find a solution for the overwhelming financial burden, her faith in human decency overriding the business concerns that normally govern such decisions in a profession where compassion often conflicted with economic reality. Word of Charlie's story began to spread through the veterinary clinic's social media channels, where Dr. Mitchell had posted the letter along with photos of the injured dog and the homeless man who had risked his own safety to bring him for help, the post accompanied by a simple request for community support that exploded across local networks within hours. The response was immediate and overwhelming, with people sharing the story and offering donations, volunteer services, and resources that transformed the seemingly impossible situation into a community rallying point for everyone who had ever loved an animal or believed in the power of loyalty and sacrifice. Local news stations picked up the story, interviewing Marcus and Dr. Mitchell about the remarkable circumstances that had brought them together, Charlie's courage becoming a symbol of hope and determination that resonated with people facing their own struggles and challenges. The outpouring of support extended far beyond financial contributions as the community embraced Charlie's story as their own, with volunteers offering to help with his recovery, local businesses donating supplies and services, and individuals sharing their own stories of animal loyalty and unconditional love that created a network of support around this unlikely trio. Eleanor's letter was read on radio stations and shared in online communities, her words about love not being measured by wealth but by willingness to care for others striking a chord with people who understood that sometimes the most profound acts of kindness come from those who have the least to give but the biggest hearts to share. Marcus found himself transformed from an invisible member of society into a local hero, his decision to help Charlie despite his own desperate circumstances proving that character and compassion were not dependent on financial status or social standing. The transformation was not just about money and resources, though both were flowing in faster than anyone had anticipated, but about the way Charlie's story had awakened something in people who had become accustomed to scrolling past stories of suffering and need, his journey from desperation to hope providing a tangible way for community members to participate in something meaningful and positive. Hospital staff worked around the clock to save Charlie's life, their professional expertise enhanced by emotional investment in his recovery, as they witnessed daily improvements that seemed to justify everyone's faith in the power of collective compassion and determination. Marcus remained by Charlie's side throughout the recovery process, sleeping in the hospital waiting room and learning about animal care from the veterinary staff who had embraced him as part of their extended family, his presence providing comfort to Charlie while also demonstrating the authentic love that had motivated his original decision to help. As days passed and Charlie's condition stabilized, the story continued to evolve, with people tracking his progress and celebrating each milestone as if he were their own beloved pet. The updates on his recovery becoming a source of daily inspiration for thousands of people who had invested emotionally in his survival and success. The community that had formed around Charlie's story discovered that helping others created connections and purpose that extended far beyond the original crisis, transforming individual lives while also strengthening the social bonds that make neighborhoods into true communities where people look out for each other and recognize that everyone has value regardless of their current circumstances. 3 weeks after that rainy day in the alley, Charlie took his first tentative steps on newly healed legs, his tail wagging with an enthusiasm that brought tears to the eyes of everyone who had followed his journey from desperation to recovery, his resilience serving as living proof that love and determination could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles when supported by a community willing to invest in hope rather than resign themselves to helplessness. Marcus watched from the hospital room chair that had become his temporary home, marveling at the transformation not just in Charlie's physical condition but in his own life circumstances, which had changed so dramatically that he sometimes wondered if he was dreaming about the apartment that community donations had secured for him and the job offer from Dr. Mitchell's clinic, where his natural empathy with animals had revealed talents he never knew he possessed. The letter from Eleanor had accomplished far more than ensuring Charlie's survival, as her final act of love had created ripple effects that touched hundreds of lives and demonstrated the power of faith in humanity, even when circumstances seemed to provide every reason for cynicism and despair. Marcus had received word that Eleanor had passed away peacefully in the hospice where she had spent her final days, but not before learning that Charlie was safe and loved, surrounded by people who understood the depth of the bond they had shared and committed to honoring her memory by ensuring that her beloved companion would never again face abandonment or neglect. The funeral home that handled Eleanor's arrangements had been moved by her story to provide services at no cost, while the community had raised funds for a memorial garden where Charlie could visit a special bench dedicated to the woman who had loved him enough to orchestrate this miraculous rescue through her own selfless planning and his unwavering loyalty. Charlie's recovery became a catalyst for broader changes in the community's approach to homelessness and animal welfare, with the veterinary clinic establishing a fund to help people in financial crisis care for their pets, recognizing that the bond between humans and animals often provided crucial emotional support during the most difficult times in people's lives. Marcus became the program coordinator, his unique perspective as someone who had experienced both homelessness and the transformative power of compassion making him the perfect advocate for others facing similar challenges, his story serving as proof that circumstances could change rapidly when communities chose to see potential rather than just problems in the people around them. The apartment that Marcus and Charlie now shared became a symbol of hope for others struggling with homelessness, a tangible reminder that situations that seemed permanent could transform when the right combination of individual courage and community support came together at the crucial moment. Charlie adapted to his new life with the same determination he had shown during his desperate journey, becoming a therapy dog who visited hospitals and nursing homes where his story of survival and loyalty provided comfort to people facing their own health challenges and reminding them that healing was possible even after the most devastating injuries and losses. Years later, Marcus would often sit with Charlie in Eleanor's memorial garden, reading her letter aloud to visitors who came to hear the story that had become local legend, a testament to the power of love that transcends death and the importance of believing that somewhere in the world there are people who will respond to calls for help even when they have very little to give themselves. Charlie would rest his head on Marcus's lap during these readings, his peaceful expression suggesting that he understood the significance of his role in connecting Eleanor's final act of love with the community's awakening to its own capacity for compassion and generosity. The letter that had once represented a desperate plea for help had become a charter for ongoing kindness, inspiring daily acts of service and sacrifice that proved Eleanor's faith in humanity had been justified by the extraordinary chain of events that began with a broken dog dragging himself to a trash can where the right person would find him at exactly the right moment to begin a transformation that no one could have predicted, but everyone could celebrate as proof that miracles still happen. When ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things in response to authentic need and genuine love.